In 3, 2, 1.
There we go. Good morning, and the meeting is now called to order. We had a little challenges with changes in the ways of getting down here, and we're having our first, for me anyway, in-person meeting here at HART. I'm not sure that we've had one at HART before recently. I'm Pat Kemp, and I'm chair of the HART Strategic Planning and External Relations Committee. Welcome to the May 17th, 2021 Strategic Planning and External Relations Committee meeting. The meeting format is hybrid. Quorum is physically present at HART administrative offices, at least I think so, at the Florida Conference Room, and the rest of the board members will be participating via online media virtually. So we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please look at your screens or your devices. An image of the flag is displayed, and please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And staff, if you could do roll call, please.
Good morning, this is Danielle from HART. Director Frazier.
Present.
Director Hudson.
Here.
Director Johnson.
Here.
Chair Kemp.
Here.
Director Overman.
Here.
Director McLean.
Here.
Director Schisler.
Here.
You do have a quorum, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we will do our approval of the minutes. And starting on page 5, you'll see the Strategic Planning and External Relations Committee hybrid meeting minutes from January 25th, 2021, February 15th, 2021, March 15th, 2021, and April 19th.
Move to approve.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilman Schisler and a second by Director Hudson. And if we can take a roll call vote, please.
Director Frazier.
Yes.
Director Hudson.
Yes.
Director Johnson.
Yes.
Chair Kemp.
Yes.
Director McLean.
Yes.
Director Overman.
Yes.
Director Schisler.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next agenda item is public comment. Is there anybody registered before public comment this morning?
No, ma'am, there was no one pre-registered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And next, we'll move right on to the presentations. We have our first presentation today, and we have access to opportunity, the connection between jobs and transit in Tampa Bay. I'm looking very forward to it. Mr. Dave Sobush, Director, Policy of Research, Tampa Bay Partnership, is with us today to do an overview. And Mr. Sobush, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. Good morning, directors. Dave Sobush, Director of Policy and Research with the Tampa Bay Partnership, excited to share with you the results of a multi-year research project that we've undertaken to understand how planned transit investments in the Tampa Bay region can affect job access. If we could go to the next slide, please. So just as a little bit of background, the origin and maybe inspiration for this work was a 2011 report that the Brookings Institution did called Missed Opportunity, Transit and Jobs in Metropolitan America. And that study found that Tampa Bay ranked 93rd out of the top 100 markets in terms of the share of jobs within the metro accessible within a 90-minute transit commute. As the partnership is part of our public policy and interest in transit, try to understand, why is it we're doing what we're doing with regards to transit. We always said it was about access to jobs, and somebody had the bright idea to say, well, can we quantify that? And so all eyes looked at me, and so I called Adi Tomer, who was the lead researcher at Brookings who did the 2011 report, explained to him what we were trying to do. And the first piece of advice he gave me was, don't do it. It's too much work, but if you do, call the University of Minnesota Accessibility Observatory. And we'll get to that in just a moment. One of the key things that we did with this research is that we modeled system-wide investments in transit as opposed to specific lines or specific projects. And I'll explain those scenarios as we get into the presentation. And rather than look at a 90-minute transit commute, which we thought was a little lengthy, we changed our scope of analysis to a 60-minute commute. So in many ways, while our work is born out of the work done by Brookings in 2011, in many ways we can't make direct comparisons simply because we've sort of changed the rules of engagement in there. One of the important things to know here is we didn't, at the partnership or the University of Minnesota Accessibility Observatory, did not invent transit projects. We went directly to the agency. So our consultant, Tyndale Oliver, who works on many of the transit development plans here locally, worked with staff at HART, PSTA, Pasco County Public Transit, I believe even the folks that run the Bull Runner, to understand what is in your 10-year transit development plans. And so Tyndale Oliver took those plans, converted them into code that the University of Minnesota's computer systems could read, the GTFS code, and ran the analyses using a data set from the Census Bureau that talks about the origin and destination of residents and their jobs. And as we go through these scenarios and the numbers, I want you to note that the figures you see are all additive, so they are building upon the previous scenario. And so with that, let's talk about the scenarios we modeled. Next slide, please. So scenario A is improved local bus service, and that translates into the 10-year transit development plan needs elements. So it's what is in the HART TDP, the PSTA TDP, et cetera. Scenario B adds on to that, adds on some local premium projects, most notably the Sun Runner, which is the downtown St. Pete to the Beach BRT system under construction, the TECO streetcar modernization and extension, as well as the Florida Avenue BRT. Scenario C adds in a regional premium transit project in the regional rapid transit, the 41-mile Wesley Chapel to downtown St. Petersburg, connecting the key employment and activity centers in the region. And then scenario D is the whole kit and caboodle, and it's really that TBARTA Envision 2030 regional TDP, not the needs element, but the vision element. So it is littered with multiple BRTs, it's ferry service, it's passenger service on CSX rail lines, and you'll see the results from that as we dive in. Next slide, please. So the first scenario is the 10-year TDP, the local bus improvements. And the map that's on the left-hand side of each of these slides, the dark green shows percentage increases in job access of 100% or more. And it goes down to the very lightest green is between 0 and 10%. One thing to note here is you get a certain numerator and denominator effect here. And while you'll see initially, at least for example, the urban core of Hillsborough County and the city of Tampa, it is not very dark green. That is because even with our relatively meager transit service relative to other regions, the city of Tampa in the urban core does have the best transit service within the region. And while they do not have a tremendous percentage increase, they have a large numeric increase, and we'll get into some of that as we go. But across the entire metro area, which is actually Hernando, Pasco, Pinellas, and Hillsborough, we see that these TDP needs elements get the average worker an additional 26,000 jobs, which is a 29% increase across the board, and changes from 7.2% of all jobs in the metro accessible within 60 minutes to 9.2. And that may not seem like a lot, but it's a lot. And that's out of the base of 1.2 million jobs in the MSA. And you see there the relative statistics for both the city of Tampa and Hillsborough County. Again, the percentage increase, city of Tampa 19.4 below the regional figure, but that numeric change of 42,700 additional jobs, and the share of all jobs accessible, more than a fifth of all jobs in the entire 4-county metro accessible within a 60-minute transit commute for City of Tampa residents. Going into scenario B, you see that the map on the left didn't change that much, and that's not a typo. Really, these premium transit projects do not, in and of themselves, contribute a significant amount to job access. It moves the needle from...
I don't think we have a different map.
Next slide. I had one job to do, 2 jobs, give the presentation. Second job was to...
It's hard to think about both things.
I'm lucky if I can walk and breathe at the same time sometimes. So, thank you. Scenario B, the map didn't change that much. And we get a meager increase by adding in the Sunrunner, the Tico streetcar, and the Florida Avenue BRT. And those, that does not say those are not good projects, but they don't move the needle a lot in terms of job access. And the rest of the statistics are pretty close to what we saw in scenario A. Scenario C, when we add in the regional rapid transit, again, a improved statistics related to job access, but not as big of a jump as we saw just by putting the local bus needs elements in the system. We move from 30-point-something to 35.2, so a little bit of a larger job access increase going from B to C than rather from A to B. And we get to just under 10% of all jobs in the metro accessible within a 60-minute transit commute. And again, you see the common phenomenon of the numeric change in Tampa and Hillsborough County being larger than that of the region, but the percentage change being somewhat less. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so here's the whole kit and caboodle. This is everything that we've seen before, but it's adding in the ferry, it's adding in passenger service on the CSX tracks, it's adding in multiple BRTs, additional limited express service, and we get to a 52,000 plus increase in jobs accessible to the typical MSA worker, and that's just under 60%, 57.9 job access increase. And we've moved from 7.2% of jobs accessible within the region to 11.3. And we note here that under the Envision 2030 scenario that 116,000 workers out of those 1.2 million, so just around 10% of the workers are able to access 150,000 more jobs. And again, the statistics for Tampa and Hillsborough County. Next slide, please. One of the good things about this analysis that was done for us by the University of Minnesota is they gave us really granular data, and we can use that data to model all sorts of different geographies. And one of the things we took a look at earlier on in 2020 was the areas that had a large share of unemployment or claims for reemployment assistance due to the COVID pandemic. And so these areas that are shaded here represent zip codes where 5% or more of the workforce filed in the early months of the pandemic an initial claim for reemployment assistance or unemployment benefits. And we note here that just around 30% of all zip codes in the metro met that criteria. There's 414,000 workers that were in those areas. And while we saw 56,000 job increase under in the scenario D, these workers would have access to 76,000 additional jobs. And so again, when we're thinking about ways that a community can prepare itself to be resilient in the face of pandemic response or other disaster, the connecting people to employment opportunities is an important part of that. And then finally, we took a look from an equity lens, taking a look at areas of high poverty and limited vehicle access. So the shaded areas on this map show block groups, which is a unit of census geography, where the poverty rate is above 20%, or rather, where greater than 20% of households had no vehicle, or greater than 75% of households only had one vehicle. And again, right around 30%, 28.9% of the geography in the metro met those criteria. And we see a 74,000 job increase under scenario D for residents of these areas. And finally, this shows all of the scenarios and the relevant statistics in terms of job access change numerically as well as percentage-wise. and the share of jobs within the metro accessible within a 60-minute transit commute. And you see that additive function, you see kind of that, big jump going from the baseline just by adding local bus, and then minor steps up when you add the regional premium transit and the local premium transit, and then of course under a very ambitious Envision 2030 plan, another big jump up in terms of both numeric percentage and the share of jobs accessible to the typical MSA worker. Here's just a breakdown of the geographies that were analyzed. You see that the numeric changes are largest in our urban centers and smallest in our more less densely populated communities. And on the flip side, the percentage changes. I'm sorry. You're doing a great job keeping up with me. The percentage changes, it's sort of the reverse of that, where our less densely populated areas have a larger percentage change. Next slide. So, finally, one of the things that we do each year at the partnership in collaboration with United Way Suncoast and Community Foundation at Tampa Bay is our regional competitiveness report. And as you know, when we look at that, both ridership and transit vehicle supply in terms of vehicle revenue miles, we've ranked 20th out of the 20 markets we study. When we took a look at job access, the University of Minnesota, they do these rankings already. And currently we are 15th out of the 20 markets in the regional competitiveness report, which means that despite sort of the limited availability and the limited access, our transit agencies in the region are doing a better job, whether it's intentional or not, of connecting people to jobs within the region. And if we were to move from the baseline to that Envision 2030, that scenario D, the good news is we'd move up, but we still wouldn't be at the top, and that's with billions and billions of dollars of transit investment, which gives you an idea of sort of the deficit from which we're operating at present. So I thank you for your time. Just some key takeaways before we go. One is that job access is and should be an additional goal to have for transit planning. I heard one time if transit is the answer to our question, what is that question? What problem is it we're trying to solve? And so use that as for goal setting and for analysis for transit planning. Another one is that it's the local bus service. That's the workhorse. The premium transit is a nice show horse, but it's the local transit that gets people where they need to be. This analysis done by University of Minnesota found that the regional rapid transit had a larger impact on job access versus the premium projects that serve a single county. And that Envision 2030 scenario certainly is ambitious and has a very large increase in terms of the share of jobs accessible change as well as the numeric change. And that we would move from 15th to 9th among our 20 markets. When you expand that to all of the markets that the University of Minnesota takes a look at, the top 49 markets that they do, Tampa Bay jumps from 41st to 27th. So just a little bit of additional context there. So now I thank you and gladly stand, Madam Chair, for any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you. And I see Commissioner Overman, you have your hand raised. You're recognized.
Thank you. And Commissioner Kemp, your audio is a little muffled, so I'm not sure if that's just my system or everybody else, but I've noticed it's a little bit difficult to hear you. Dave, thank you very, very much for this presentation. I noticed there wasn't a link in the agenda to the actual slides, and there's great data here. And I think the reason I want to really dive into it a little more is twofold. One, I think it's critically important that we look at equity in our policy. I know the county is working on rolling out our equity profile pretty quickly, but it looks as though in your summary, if I heard you correctly, that scenario D would have the greatest impact on those individuals that are transit dependent in connecting people to jobs. And that plays into two goals of mine, which is, where do I need to focus not only my efforts to be here, and to promote transit. But how does that connect to where people live and how they afford to live? Because transit's a component of a family's financial picture, and whether they need a second car or whether or not they can live with transit, or if they don't have a car, can they get to work? So I think it's critical that we look at which scenario we focus, and then based on that, worked with the current TOD study that's happening, but also in developing a TOD strategy along with the counties, our local county, but also regional county, to see how we can best prepare for success in the people that work here. And that's why I really enjoyed seeing the numbers that you did and the various different outcomes, because if scenario D creates the greatest access to jobs based on what those routes look like, then that would signal to me in my efforts of marrying transit and affordable housing, where our focus should be. And so I'm looking forward to getting copies of the slide if possible, because I looked on your website, I didn't find it, but and like I said, I didn't see the link in the agenda to be able to look at it at length. But thank you so much for pointing out the comparisons, because I think it's important when we're looking at how HART grows and how we move forward and how we deploy resources towards enhanced transit. It'll make a big difference in making sure that we're getting the best ROI for our citizens, but also, in terms of the return on investment for the routes that are developed as a consequence of our strategic planning. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Overman. I'd point out that, scenario D is additive to the other scenarios. And so you got to go from walking in scenario A to running in scenarios B and C to sprinting like Usain Bolt in scenario D. So with that little bit of, context, certainly point well taken, and I believe staff will be making the presentation available following today's presentation.
Thank you for that clarification. Director Hudson.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks to you and Rick and I think the partnership. You guys have been really laser focused on, job accessibility, which I think is one of the ways that people most frequently experience firsthand, like the shortcomings of our transit system. It's not abstract, it's very real. And one question I had is whether any of these studies have looked at land use and zoning at all to sort of shape the direction, shape the trajectory of where new businesses are going. So I pulled up the old study, and some of the top metros for accessibility on transit were Honolulu, Madison, Wisconsin, Tucson, places that I wouldn't intuitively think would beat us so badly. Is that kind of off topic for what you guys are focused on, or do you know if there's any research on that?
It's certainly not off topic, and it's a complex system.
Sure.
There's two ways to improve job accessibility. One is, there's at least two ways to improve it. One is to get transit from where people are living to where they're working. Another is to shorten the distance between those places. So certainly land use is a way to improve job access. And I don't know if the University of Minnesota does this, but I imagine there's probably some sort of research institute out there that can just pick up jobs from one place and say, if you move them here, you would see better accessibility via transit. The way Minnesota does it is they take a look at, changes in the transit network and how that affects, job access for residents.
Director McLean.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And Dave, great presentation. As with all these studies the partnership has done, it always does highlight very good areas of improvement and also where we stand in terms of a national standpoint. And thanks for the explanation. We have to kind of crawl, walk, run through the scenarios, whether it's A, B, C, and D, of course. It was interesting that you pointed out that scenario C, in all honesty, would probably have the largest effect on our community and enhancing transit for our constituents. So that's interesting. I did want to ask you a question. It gets back to the gist of why we're at where we're at right now. As you know, we've had a kind of a large focus on transit over the last 5 years that I've been involved in it. And we've seen Tampa and the region grow substantially. In your mind, Dave, and I guess using some of the studies you've dealt with, is there a real direct cause, and it might be a rhetorical question if I said, hey, is the cause that we're in the shape we're in right now, is it financially? And like I said, it might be rhetorical, but just wanted to get your opinion on why we're at where we're at. And then, again, just to thank you for the briefing, very enlightening. And as Commissioner Unruh stated, I would like to see those slides too, because there's a lot of great information there. So,
Madam Chair, if I may.
Sure.
Thank you, Director McLean. I think you answered the question. It's financial, and it's why additional funds to put these plans, get them off the shelf and get shovels into the ground is so important. It's why many in this room, the partnership included, have been supportive of those referendum efforts for many, many years, most recently in 2018, and, just got to keep swinging the axe, to get that where we need it to be. Thank you.
And with that, I don't see anyone else, but I would just like to say, as I'm sure you expect, maybe, and for me, this is a watershed in the way that we are looking at transit in the region. I've always thought by strengthening the parts is what you do to strengthen the region, and I don't think people have understood how critically low our investment is in transit. And as you've stated, which I thought was interesting, and in some ways not surprising to me, that we're serving our critical needs better than other places, maybe because we're so distressed and so limited, that we recognize that in some way. I think that what you've put out here has flipped, totally reversed the regional conversation with the focus on the interstate regional rapid transit single route. And I've always thought by strengthening the parts, and I saw some additional information which I'd like to layer into this at some point, about that I had asked actually for the TBARDA on this regional transit to look at, and that's how it's serving Pasco, Hillsborough, and Pinellas. And I thought it was really definitive because only 5% of the users, and that's projected hypothetical, would use it to cross county lines, whereas 100% in Pasco would. It's obviously more some issues in those, and no one, they didn't even have a projected individual that would ever take the transit, and I just think it's so obvious, from Wesley Chapel to St. Petersburg. Only though, very few people would ever take it from Wesley Chapel to the airport or West Shore. So it's the routes we already have that we need to strengthen within the region, but also our local routes. And it is the local bus that is the workhorse, and that's what all this has shown, and all those other things, only very incrementally. Scenario A is a scenario for us to do all our focus on, just what you're saying. And, the other things only bring us de minimis returns for investment and efficiency, and may not even be there. But I also would like in the future, I think it's good to see, and you probably have generated this a little bit about the scenarios, if you were to add in, after you do A, if you add in, for instance, CSX, and then we have terms and costs of efficiency, costs and efficiencies, and that, that I'm really curious to see even more generated stats. I also, on the ferries, a strange kind of thing. I'm not sure if you did the connection between South County and MacDill as a job connection, but then it's also got the Tampa to St. Pete, which is no kind of commuter connection, but a connection that happens for people just enjoying those places, or visits or trips, or something to that. It doesn't work as a commuter route. But this is, to me, extremely interesting. I think it sets another tone for where we move, and the scenario A being the strength and base of every transit system. Your local bus is where you have your most efficiencies, most service, most usefulness, most access to jobs and opportunities. And we're, if anything, less different than other people in that regard, and more that way because of our geography separated by bridges from Pinellas in one case, which are a daunting barrier without stops. So in that way, for transit service. But this is, to me, extremely interesting. That focus on arterial roads is where I've been trying to get us, on arterial road and local bus and, scenario A. So thank you. I think this is really different than the conversation we've been having.
Well, you're welcome, and that's why we do this work, is to incite conversation. I might take a slightly different look at it and say that what this study shows is that if you use job access as your target, you get some certain results. Certainly, if you want, if affordable housing or land use is your goal, and that's why you're implementing transit, it's going to require, different types of connections. And certainly, and I think it's with respect to the regional rapid transit, because it is, along corridors that are already served by transit, you don't see as much of a jump there. But for that 100% of passcode that's coming into Hillsborough, those are workers for Hillsborough businesses. Those are customers for Hillsborough businesses. And so I think it's important, and we would continue to say the more we can connect this region and perform as a market of 3.9 million people, and the better off we'd be, and the more we'll see our rankings improve across the board.
And I wouldn't contest any of that. It's just the 100% that's leaving, and they only judged on that one route on their information. So, but like 99% of it is either USF. I mean, probably, I don't know what percentage would be USF, which is always, it's a big route that we already have. And then another smaller percent would be downtown. And then like no one to West Shore, and, barely. And no one across the bridge, zero in their projection. So, and that makes sense, because people don't travel that way. They don't travel that way in their cars, and so they're not going to do it by transit. That's not the way to focus. But I always thought jobs access actually was the name of the game, and that the other stuff was incidental to that, TOD and everything else, myself. But this is just great. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
And Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Yeah, it's Director McLean. As we had that conversation, local versus regional, like Dave mentioned, I think as we look at the region as a whole, how we're expanding as a region, the growth we've seen and all, I think we do have to take regional transit in serious consideration as we move forward. And that's why I targeted it on scenario 3 as you do the crawl, walk, run phase of it. Obviously, local transit is the workhorse, always will be, and that's our bread and butter. But I think as we expand and as those lines begin to blur, if you will, how people move about, how jobs move about, I think regional transit plays a key part in this region here and in Tampa in general, as we look at the nation as a whole. And I think if we do not secure in the future some form of what I would call reliable, efficient regional transit, then I think from an economic standpoint, again, as a nation whole, we're going to lose out. And so I'm still looking at that scenario C. Of course, like I mentioned, local transit is the workhorse, always will be for the local community, but we have got to start taking regional transit, and the efforts we're making right now, whether that's the regional rapid transit, whether that's BRTs, we've just got to take regional transit a little bit more seriously, I think, from our community standpoint. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. And just in terms of, because of the way you frame that, I think there has to be just, there's, it's what we define as regional. And the route between Wesley Chapel and USF is defined as regional, but we have much longer routes within Hillsborough County and whatever else. So there's questions about definitions of regional as well. And no one would say that we shouldn't serve all that those areas. But at any rate, with that, I think we can move to our next presentation. Thank you so much. That was so good. And so with this, we will move to our strategic planning process with Ms. Adelie LeGrand. I'm really looking forward to this. HART Chief Executive Officer, you're recognized.
Good morning, everyone. Good to
I
see you.
think-
Can
is
you
your
hear
mic
me?
on?
It is on. Can you, am I projecting?
There.
No? You can't hear me?
I can.
Okay. Good morning again, and thank you for this opportunity to present. It was great that Dave came because he really set the stage and the tenor for what we're going to discuss next. So, Danielle, do you have the slide, please? Let me go to the first slide, maybe. Do you have? Okay. So today we're going to talk about the strategic planning process. And I want to first start and say that this has definitely been a collaborative effort internally with the team. So I've been working closely with Chris Cochran, Lorena Hardwick, and Justin Willits to really start having the conversation about where we are currently and, you know, what does our data look like as far as developing a strategic plan. So today I'm just going to quickly walk through a little bit of a glance of where we are and then talk about the process. So next slide, please. So this information is probably very familiar to you because you've been here doing this work for a while. So this slide is really just sharing a bit about, you know, what are we, who are we currently, and some of, you know, our statistics from the past, right? So we were established in 1979. It lists the number of routes, our ridership. Again, just presenting a snapshot of who HART is and the services that we provide and the fleet that we currently have. And as we talk about the strategic planning process, a part of the process, the first step is really understanding the baseline, right? Where are we currently? What have we been doing? And then the end goal is really where do we want to land? Next slide, please. So when we go from looking at us at a glance, again, now you see the system map. The objective here is not for you to identify individual routes, but just to show, you know, the concentration of where the service is in the county, the opportunities that we have to expand, as well as to add additional lines, if you will, to this map. Again, this is where we are currently. Next slide. When you think about our transit ridership over, you know, the last several years, and again, we recognize that we have the pandemic, so you look at 2020, it looks abysmal compared to all those other years, but again, you see that we had some changes, right, from 2016, you see there's a drop in 2017, a drop in 2018, we made some gains in 2019. One key thing to point out is you see that the streetcar ridership has increased significantly between 18 and 19. That's when it went to not collecting fares on the streetcar. So you see those numbers increase even during the pandemic. The streetcar numbers are definitely, you know, doing better than they had done previous years when we weren't even in a pandemic. But the point here is to say that, you know, there is some data that exists that helps us to understand how effective our service has been, where the service has been utilized, and our opportunities moving forward. Next slide. This slide, again, is not one with the intention of you reading everything, but, you know, as Dave just mentioned in his last presentation, there are a lot of planning studies that have been conducted, and this is just going back to 2016, right? So the way this is delineated, each color represents a different organization or agency that conducted these studies, but there's a lot of existing studies out there with a lot of recommendations on how the region should be moving forward as it relates to public mobility. And we really just called out studies here on this slide that relate to public mobility. So the intention here for us as a team internally is to go through these studies, which the team is doing this, and identifying the recommendations so that we can start to have a conversation around the recommendations, categorizing them, and then talking about, you know, how close are we to implementing them. Next slide, please. So as a part of that, you know, looking at our current mission and vision, Our mission is HART takes people to the places that enhance their lives. And our vision is HART invites, inspires, and implements sustainable and innovative transportation. So that's our current mission, right? So if we go think about the previous slide with all the studies and all of the concepts and recommendations and aspirational plans that the region has conducted over the last 5 years, and you think about that through the context of our mission and our vision, our conversation moving forward through the strategic planning processes is our vision really taking us to a place where we can implement the recommendations that we as HART see as the projects that we want to move forward. And if not, let's start to revise our vision so that it better reflects where we want to go, where we aspire toward, and then start establishing goals and objectives to allow us to implement this vision. Next slide, please. So what does that look like? This is the strategic planning process here. So as I stated, this has been a collaborative process internally with the team. As soon as I got here, I want to say within a couple of weeks, I tasked both Lorena and Justin and Chris to work on this effort. And what they've been doing is really going through the process and looking at those previous studies, understanding the needs and objectives and the measures of success that have been already documented. So a lot of this work already existed. It's just a matter of going through and, and analyzing or collecting that data. The next step was to really assess the strengths, the weaknesses, mobility demands, emerging technologies, options, everything you can think about, exploring the opportunities that currently exist. This part is, I would say, kind of fun because every day there's some new opportunity. I actually had a call last week about the air hubs or something. I guess there's some new technology that we'll all be able to fly around. So now that's going to be on the list, I guess, of something that we can ponder. But again, what we've been doing for the last several months is going through the data, understanding the technologies that are out there, and then understanding, where we can actually start to make some gains, right? What can we implement, and what does that look like? And again, just so that we can have the conversation and start to move the conversation forward. So where are we right now? We're focusing on visioning, and that's really for us as a team internally, and then coming back to you as a committee and then as a board to talk about our vision, our goals, and measures of progress. And the way we're doing that is similar to the conversation that we heard earlier from Mr. Sobush. And that is really for us to start having a conversation on what are the goals and what are the areas that are important to HART as it relates to public transit. Should one of our goals be focusing on job access? That's something that we're going to come to you with data similar to what we just heard today to recommend that that's one of our focus areas. Should it be focused on land use and affordable housing? We've had some conversations around that as well. So it's really about us working internally to come back to you at our next session to share with you some of the recommendations from the previous studies and then some of the goals that we think will be in alignment with our mission, our current mission, and then also asking for your input in revising our vision statement. Again, recognizing that the vision needs to be something that is aspirational but is also attainable. So we know it's not going to be something that we are actually accomplishing today because that's our mission, but where we'd like to go, and then also having the steps in place to get us there. After we finish the visioning process, which we're scheduling to complete that by the end of July, we'll go into another phase where we're really, I would say, sharpening the pencils to understand, what are the strategies, the trade-offs, the opportunities, some of what you mentioned, Commissioner Kemp, previously, as far as really understanding the costs, as well as the, trade-offs and efficiencies of making these, implementing the goals that we identify. And then our goal is to, at the end of this calendar year, actually have a plan that documents where we're going. And this plan will include the updated vision statement, the goals that will support the vision, the objectives to get us into implementing the goals, and then actually an action plan that will take us over the next 20 years so that we'll know programmatically, like as you heard earlier, to go from, if we're using the same terminology as the job access study, go from option A to option D. How long does it take us? What do we have to do to make that happen? And then what does the end plan look like? And that's really where we want to get to. We recognize that, building upon our local bus service or system is very important. It's the most important first step. but then we also have to incrementally add. And what does that look like in a plan? What does that look like financially? That's what we're striving to achieve by the end of this calendar year. So with that, the next slide, I believe, is just questions. So with that, I just want to thank you for the opportunity. And again, thank the team for putting this information together. Thank you, Chris, he's actually in the room. And I saw Lorena was online. And thank you, Justin, if you listen to this later. But again, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for that overview. And I'm looking here, and I don't see any hands up. You've raised a lot of questions. I think we're looking forward, at least for me, I'm really looking forward to the continued conversation and starting to define where we should be going here at HART and how we get there and what's the most efficient, cost-effective, useful way to serve the most people in the most ways. So I think it's a conversation that we've never, for me, in my years here, never robustly enough for my, had that conversation. So I'm looking forward to it. I don't see any other hands, so I guess with that, we will.
Commissioner Kim.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm glad to see the strategic planning process presentation. Thank you very much for it. A lot of the information that came out of the previous presentation from David was very, very good, but it's like, okay, what do we do with this next? So at this point, we run the risk of becoming somewhat schizophrenic because we're trying to do so many things at one time. So I'm glad to see that we're initiating the strategic planning process, and it sounds like you got a good start and a good handle on it, and I'm looking forward to the results. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a very exciting time. It's a new time for us. And we will move now to our network reevaluation short-term service plan update. Mr. Chris Cochran, Director of Service Development.
Thank you, Chairwoman and board members. Chris Cochran, for the record, Chris Cochran.
We cannot hear him.
That's what I thought, but
There we go.
I'm not sure.
Microphone was off, sorry.
Okay, good, thank you.
For the record, Chris Cochran, Director of Service Development. Today, quickly, just a update on the network reevaluation study and short-term operations plan that was launched early 2020. At this point in time, there were, just a reminder and background, back in February 2020, the board unanimously approved this study and plan awarded to Kinetics, Kinetics Group, and the plan was to do essentially a market assessment with the first 3 tasks of the study, and out of that market assessment to develop a short-term operations plan for the next 2 to 3 to 4 years based on the All for Transportation funding and how we would grow the system with that money based on the market assessment that was done. The funding for that, the first $300,000 came from an FTA grant. The total funding for the study was $405,000. The first $300,000 was funded by FTA, and the remaining $105,000 that was to fund the actual short-term operations plan was to be funded by the All for Transportation surtax. So at this point in time, we've completed tasks 1 through 3, and we have been provided with a completed deliverable of a very comprehensive market assessment that has provided HART with some very, very valuable information on jobs accessibility, are how we serve the population. Just some quick basic numbers. It tells us that we're serving about 50% of the population within 3/4 of a mile of our transit system, and similar numbers within 3/4 of a mile. We serve all the jobs within Hillsborough County. So information like that, it lets us know that we are serving the transit-dependent areas of Hillsborough County with more transit than we do the general population as a whole for Hillsborough County, which is a great goal for us to be achieving with the minimum amount of resources that we have. So those are just some examples of the information that we've garnered out of the network evaluation. So just some really great data that we'll be able to carry on into our strategic plan. Being that the All for Transportation surtax did not pass, we do not have the funding to move forward with tasks 4 and 5, and being that they were really aimed at developing that funding, that's not moving forward anyway. So as part of tasks 1 through 3, there was an origin and destination survey, and our last origin and destination survey was done in 2016, I believe. So this is a real critical piece that needs to be done. It's information that is used by not only HART, by other agencies to model, that goes into modeling for big capital, small starts, grants, and those sorts of things. So it was due to launch in March, and of course, COVID came along, and we put that on hold. We are currently working with the vendor to be able to revisit that now that a couple agencies in the nation have gone ahead and done their origin and destination surveys in this environment, and we're taking some best lessons learned in how that's being done, and we're evaluating when the best time to move forward and how we're going to do that is. We can have a continued update on when that'll be done at a later time. So at this point in time, I'd be happy to open it up to any questions that you all might have on this item.
Oops, thank you. I don't see any questions here. So with that, I guess we'll move to concluding this part of the business for today, and we'll go to old business, new business, and hearing none, we'll adjourn the meeting. And I guess we'll take a short break till the next committee meeting.